Bill Wichterman served as special assistant to President George W. Bush in the White House. He was the president's personal liaison to the conservative movement and to Christians. Before serving in the White House, he served on several senior staff-level positions on Capitol Hill, including policy advisor to the Senate Majority Leader, Bill Fritz, and chief of staff to Congressman Joe Pitts and Congressman Bill Baker. He's also been a senior advisor to Rick Santorum in 2012 and 2016 presidential campaigns. He's the author of the book, Dying to Live, Finding Joy in Giving Yourself to God, The Culture Upstream from Politics, and Making Goodness Fashionable. He's the president of Faith and Law, holds a master's in political theory, and has been married for 27 years and is the father of 3 redheads.
Thank you for hosting this debate. Thank you to Lifebridge Church. This is an important and weighty issue. I also want to thank Dr. Clore for your remarks, Bob Vanderplatz and Bishop Jackson. Evangelicals face a difficult choice this year, far more than any in my lifetime. The choice has divided us with many good people on both sides of this debate. Sadly, the division has also prompted the questioning of motives. This is unhelpful and it's unfair. We'll let God judge motives. Our job is hard enough, being e pluribus unum, out of many, one, and we don't need to begin by questioning one another's motives. Quick word about me. You'll have a hard time getting to my right. I'm a Republican because I'm a conservative, and a conservative because I'm a Christian. I believe that conservative policies best reflect a Christian worldview, but I refuse to divinize my own politics. Politically, I don't pretend to speak for God. Yet the driving motivation in my politics is the same as that for the rest of my life, to put the Lord first in my heart and my actions. There was only one of the 17 Republicans running for president whom I couldn't support. He won. I've heard my fellow believers give 4 reasons to vote for Trump. First, he's the lesser of 2 evils. Second, God uses bad people for good purposes. Third, he believes nothing, so with good people around him, Trump can be steered to do good things. And 4, Trump is a good man. The first argument, that Trump is the lesser of 2 evils, is the most compelling of the 3 arguments to me. I've used the same argument many times over the years, trying to convince my friends not to throw away their vote on a third-party candidate because the Republican wasn't sufficiently pure. I respect my friends who've concluded they must vote for Trump, however reluctantly. They believe the Supreme Court hangs in the balance and Trump is more likely to appoint conservative justices. I think they're right about that, too. I worked on judicial nominations for then Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist and also in the Bush White House, and I care deeply about the court. And yet I've concluded that this justification is insufficient for 2 reasons. The first, Trump may be a threat to our democratic republic. This is a serious charge. Unfortunately, Trump's own words have given me reason to be worried. I care about the Supreme Court because I care deeply about the government handed down to us by the founders. The founders knew how difficult it would be to sustain a democratic republic. Benjamin Franklin said to the wife of the mayor of Philadelphia when they emerged from the Constitutional Convention, "What kind of government have you given us, Mr. Franklin?" And he replied, a republic, madam, if you can keep it. Just because we've been able to preserve this republic for 200 years, more than 200 years, doesn't mean that it goes on forever. I love the Constitution because it reflects the framers' fundamentally Judeo-Christian worldview that we're fallen beings and that God loves liberty, and he made us for liberty. But Trump has often demonstrated contempt for the rule of law. He sounded more like a strong man, impatient with constitutional constraints. He advocates death to the innocent family members of terrorists. He said, I quote, "You have to take out their families." He advocates torture, not as a means of extracting important intelligence, but as a means of retribution. He said he would do, quote, "a hell of a lot more than waterboarding." He said military leaders would obey his unlawful order because, quote, "I've never had any problem leading people. If I say do it, they're going to do it." He's repeatedly praised dictators like Vladimir Putin, lauding him as a strong leader. Garry Kasparov, who's a Russian opponent of Putin's, deplores Trump's praise of Putin, saying, "Putin is a strong leader in the same way that arsenic is a strong drink." Why in the world would Trump praise Putin again and again, unless it's because he actually admires him? Trump also said this: "When the students poured into Tiananmen Square, the Chinese government almost blew it. Then they were vicious, they were horrible, but they put it down with strength. That shows you the power of strength." He encourages violence against peaceful protesters. Among his many, many statements on this, "I'd like to punch him in the face. Try not to hurt him. If you do, I'll defend you in court. Don't worry about it. Knock the crap out of them." Trump admires strength, no matter what form it takes. This is inimical to the gospel, which exalts faithfulness, humility, and meekness, things that are themselves strong because they rely on God. And this leads to the second and most compelling reason why I believe the lesser of two evils argument doesn't stand. Trump corrupts us. Some people argue that the Never Trump crowd focuses on Trump's weaknesses and ignores Clinton's. Not so. We know who Clinton is, and we're not supporting her. But I have a higher standard for a Republican nominee. Trump corrupts what it means to be a Republican. If we support him, we become complicit in his reprobate behavior. Trump mocks disabled people. He brags about how many married women he's slept with. He says prisoners of war, such as Senator John McCain, aren't heroes since they were captured. He accuses a native-born American judge of Mexican heritage of being unable to fairly rule in a case against him, what Speaker Ryan called a textbook case of racism. He insists the Muslim American father of a fallen soldier has no right to question him. He accuses President George W. Bush, my old boss, as the reason for the 9/11 terrorist attacks. He advocates a religious test as to who was allowed to enter the country, contrary to the very reason our country was founded. Charges the father of Senator Cruz as an accomplice in the murder and the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Many people won't vote for Clinton because they believe she's a liar. And they're voting for Donald Trump because they hope he's a liar. As an aside, I think it's worth noting that some evangelicals didn't vote for Romney because he wasn't conservative enough. Trump is way, way to Romney's left. He supports government-run health care. He says it repeatedly. He opposes entitlement reform, something which is killing our nation. He opposes free trade, and he has a long history of supporting liberal candidates and causes. When we line up behind this man, we undermine our credibility in the eyes of a watching world. And more than that, we do violence to our movement, saying the ends justifies the means. Another argument employed by evangelicals supporting Donald Trump is that God uses bad people for good purposes. Now, this is certainly true. But where in Scripture does it say that we should support the bad people? We're not called to do bad so that good will result. God's ways are beyond us, but our job is to support good candidates. I've heard some evangelical leaders say that we need a bad man to stand up to the bullying from the left. The implication is that a good man or woman who plays by the rules is not up to the task. It's like we're hiring a hitman to play dirty for the sake of good government. This has nothing to do with our faith. It reflects a lack of faith in the power of virtue to do what needs to be done. We don't do bad to do good. In fact, that's impossible if Scripture's to be believed. Ends and means both count in God's moral accounting. A third argument for Trump, and one I heard last week after a meeting that I had with Donald Trump along with a group of Christian leaders, is that Trump knows little and believes nothing. If we surround him with good people, he can be our puppet. Maybe so. It's patently true that his political views have shown themselves to be very flexible. He holds many different views, sometimes in the span of just a few days. And I know there are some very good people around him too. But this is a huge risk. He may not prove so pliable once given the most powerful job in the world. Plus, there are some decisions made only by the commander-in-chief. I know, I worked in the White House, especially in those moments of crisis. And I don't think he's trustworthy enough to make that right decision under pressure. The final argument in favor of Trump completely mystifies me. Namely, Trump is not bad. In fact, he's good, a truth teller, and humble, another Reagan. Trump has implied that liberal judicial nominees should be assassinated. He suggested, without proof, that the election's rigged, setting up the possibility of serious civil strife if he loses the election. He never admits he's wrong, and he rarely asks God for forgiveness, since he believes he rarely sins to begin with. If Trump is a good man, I've got a totally different definition of good. So I will stand against Trump and Clinton. Instead, I'll vote for Evan McMullin. He's a conservative and a good man who will be on the ballot in about half the states. He can be a write-in candidate in almost every state. And if no one wins 270 electoral votes, the House of Representatives will decide the outcome, as happened with Thomas Jefferson in 1801, and McMullin could be elected. Improbable? Yes. Impossible? No. Especially if enough evangelicals decide Trump doesn't deserve their vote. And it's an honorable path for those of us who want to be able to vote for an honorable conservative. I won't compromise core principle for the sake of party allegiance. If Trump becomes what it means to be a Republican, then I won't be a Republican. Hopefully, Trump's nomination will turn out to be a case of temporary insanity. But I will not allow Trump to be the face of the nation to the world, not with my vote. I will not allow vulgarity to stand in the place of virtue, not with my vote. I will not stand idly by while our national character is polluted, not with my vote. As Christians, we're called to do God's business in God's way. This means doing what we should and entrusting the results to Him.
Thank you, Bill. So, as you know, I was one of the few evangelical leaders for several months that said many of those observations and articles and spoke out when the primary, Trump was my 17th choice of 17 candidates. However, we're no longer in the primary, and there's some political realities we have to face. One of them is that Justice Scalia, bless his heart, is no longer with us, a brilliant scholar, and that appointment will be immediately replaced by the new President of the United States. Justice Ginsburg is 86 years old. She has pancreatic cancer, colon cancer, a heart stent, and is in very poor health. Probably very, very likely that those two justices will be replaced in the next administration, which will have policy implications for 25 to 30 years. All the things that we fight as social conservatives, abortion, the gay agenda, the erosion of religious liberty, secularism, these things are not being advanced by legislative bodies that have representative government. They're being advanced by the United States Supreme Court. Why do you not find that compelling, the 25 to 30 years of religious persecution that will only increase under a liberal court? Why is that not compelling to you?
And in fact, I've always found that compelling. I've walked precincts in the rain for candidates for whom I had very little regard and I really didn't like. But I did it because of the court. Donald Trump, because of all the reasons I just set out, especially with his challenging the rule of law, praising dictators, inciting violence, mocking people, the coarsening of the culture, it's a bridge too far. Culture's upstream from politics, and I care deeply about the court. But if this becomes what has been my party for 30 years, if this becomes the face of our party, I think that so corrupts us, and I can't go there. So it's tragic in my opinion, but the tragedy lay with the Republican Party nominating Donald Trump.
Thank you. I think the other political reality, the second biggest thing that I see is that, as you know, in 1992, Ross Perot ran for office. He had a personal vendetta against George Bush Sr., and it is because of Ross Perot, most political observers believe that his third-party candidacy gave us Bill Clinton. We know that in 2000, when Al Gore ran, and President Bush, who now we know is president now, but as candidate Bush, we had the historic 2000 election vote. And Ralph Nader, many historic political observations believe that he was the reason why we don't have Al Gore. Because when you have a third-party candidate, you're actually helping to support or diminish one of the major parties. That's a political reality, and how are you looking at that? It doesn't seem like you're putting that in the calculation, that by voting for Evan McMullin, we're actually helping Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, and it's back to the lesser of two evils argument, which I respect. I understand people who have come to that conclusion, however reluctantly. If I didn't think that he did so much violence to us, to our movement, to our witness in the world also. I mean, I now hear evangelicals who had been very harsh with the adulteries of Bill Clinton, making excuses for Donald Trump. I mean, Donald Trump doesn't just have locker room talk about all of his adulteries. He put it in a book. The book goes through many iterations of edits, and he was really proud of all the married women that he slept with over the years. He put it in a book. In terms of that, I mean, the way he talks, the things he says, it makes my blood boil to incite violence as he's done and to mock disabled people. Do you know anybody in your life, I'll just ask a question myself, who mocks how other people look, who's above 8th grade? I thought about it. I don't have one person in my life that way.
One final question. It seems that people that are more focused on character and personalities would tend to not like Trump, but people that are more focused on public policy and the realities of public policy that will result from a Clinton presidency were more likely to support Donald Trump. Did I say that right? Yes, I did. Why don't you find that compelling? Why are you focusing on personality as opposed to policy, which is the bottom line of politics?
So I'm not actually, if it was just a personality issue, as I said, I've supported other candidates whom I really didn't like that well. I won't name names, but I knew them and I didn't like them. This is not about personality. This is about character. There's certain things, you know, life and marriage are hugely important to me, but so is nuclear war. We're putting a guy into office who has demonstrably awful character, and we're saying, you're the guy who makes this decision. So the stakes are way too high to have someone like him in office.
Thank you, Bill.